Nice. So glad.
Uh, Barbara asked, "Well, how were the sleeping accommodations?" Well, they were 4 star, but they were way better than the toilet accommodations. the uh, the uh, the downside too for me was that we landed in Kathmandu, and then we had to take one more flight to the far western region, and I wasn't feeling very well,
Oh,
and I sort of waited. I talked with the director of the program that first night when we were out in Dangadi. We were going to be leaving the next morning for the village, and I wasn't feeling well. I said, "Let's see how the night goes." And I woke up the next morning and had a rough night. So we decided, it's just not responsible not to test. And so, sure enough, I was positive for the COVID. So I
oh,
spent for the next 3 days, I think, in the hotel in Dangadi while these guys all went out to the village, and then I joined them out in the village probably a little sooner than I should have, but I couldn't wait. Um, yeah, it was frustrating. Yeah, yeah. Um, I am almost completely better. Yeah, I've still got a little bit of a dry cough. Yeah, right. But I've been without fever or other symptoms for days now. But yep, it was second or third. I don't know. I don't remember. The first one we weren't sure. It was whatever. No, 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 no. I felt fine when I left. We took the first 2 flights, the long flight to Qatar, and then the 5 hour jump to Kathmandu, the short flight. And in Kathmandu, I was starting to feel tired. And then we stayed the night there, and then a short flight over to Dangadi. And the next day, I was starting to feel kind of under. Nobody else got it. Yeah. We flew from New York. No, there's no direct flight to Kathmandu. We flew to Qatar. And then from Qatar, we flew to Kathmandu, and then Kathmandu out to Dangadi. And this flight from Kathmandu to Dangadi was amazing. If you sit on the right side of the plane on the way out and the left side coming home, it just the flight, it's about an hour and a half. It takes off and it just parallels at eye level the Himalayas, and the views out our windows were overwhelming, just so beautiful. Yeah, it's pretty great. Hey, everybody at home. I love seeing everyone. Connie, Joan, hello. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Meryl, Peter, uh, Sherry, hello, hello. Ellen's in the car with her mother. They're on the way here, but join us virtually first as didn't want to miss the beginning. Um, and so, welcome back, those of you who are here. Um, the um, so for those that weren't with us the first session, I asked at the beginning to just get some feedback before I jumped into what I wanted to present, to make sure that it was what you wanted to receive. And you'll remember that I was wonderfully surprised that overwhelmingly people wanted to go in a direction that I actually hadn't thought to go. And so it encouraged me to go back and rewrite this second session. Um, so so here's where today takes us. Today is going to be a response to and material on the questions that came up last time. And then the third session, I'm going to kind of combine rituals and traditions around death and dying in our Jewish, I don't know, technology, along with some other things that you might think about doing now. Uh, so as I wrestled with this conversation tonight, I realized that I was running the risk of falling into a trap. So what I heard from folks last time was that there was there was a desire to talk about some of the fears and anxieties around death, some of the uncertainties around the process of dying, the moment of death, and the tensions that can put into families. At least that's how I was hearing it. And I brought a bunch of material this evening for us to explore together. But here's the trap that I don't want to fall into. I don't want this to be any sort of effort to assuage your fears in a group therapy session. In other words, what I'm going to bring is general, and what you feel or think about or are working with is personal and specific. And so I'm going to miss the mark on what I bring for all of you. But collectively, this is some material that's from our tradition that I think is valuable and worth considering. And then I'll end the conversation tonight with another set of comments, but I'm going to save that for then. So with that as a disclaimer and an apology, we'll go ahead and we'll dive in. So if you care to join me for a bracha over learning some Torah, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So like last time, I'm going to put the slides up on our screen here, and I think I'm not going to share the slides at home because it distracts me too much having to go over there and deal with the screen sharing, but I will read all the material in its entirety. So those of you who are at home will have a chance to get everything, missing nothing. So I want to playfully show you this this graphic, which I have in front of me, blown up a little bit, but was put out by Patrick Niemeyer, and he listed 100 years of fear. And I know that you can't really read it behind me, but he just playfully went through, and for each year from 1915 all the way to 2014, he just identified one thing that people were feeling collectively afraid about. So hard to see down here, but in 1916, they were afraid of Germans. In 1921, it was the Reds. In 1937, they were afraid of flying. In 1956, the body snatchers. So in 1955, mutually assured destruction of the Cold War and the nuclear arms race. Let's see. In 1984, drugs were the fear of everyone. In 1984, it was the flesh-eating bacteria that was I guess all over the shores of Florida, if I remember correctly. In 1998, we were afraid of conspiracies. In 1999, we were afraid of 2000. In 2008, we were afraid of foreclosures on homes, feeling like we're back in there. Anyway, the only reason I brought that the only reason I brought that was because I wanted to acknowledge the fact that humans are good at being afraid. It's something that just it's buried deep in our lizard brain. It's part of what's kept us alive. It's the inclination to avoid that which is dangerous. And so there is a hardwired element to fear and anxiety, which is a survival technique. Here, I'll give David, you can take a look. Yeah. And so part of what differentiates us from the rest of the animal world, as far as we know it, is that no other animals seem to be aware that their lifespan is finite and that they're going to die. As humans, we know that. I just heard today, one of my buddies said that that life is a sexually transmitted terminal disease. or something like that. And anyway, we all know that there is an expiration date, and not knowing when that is creates anxiety. The anxiety and fear of existential threat is to keep us alive. And if we know that that threat is in fact going to kill us, then we're going to feel anxiety about it. And when there's nothing to do about that anxiety, that creates greater stress. And so for humans, the fear of death is actually really common. It's not universal, but it is common. And so for those who feel that level of ickiness when addressing these topics, you're in good company, and for good biological reasons. And so I want to make sure, by the way, folks at home, I can't see the screen with your faces right now. So if you want to jump in and ask a question or interrupt me, please just unmute and do so, since I won't be able to see a raised hand. And so what I wanted to do was to go through some material this evening, which is from our tradition. Much of it is ancient, some of it is modern, and it's designed to have us think about the universality of this anxiety, and also some answers that were provided because 2,000 years ago they were afraid as well, and their rabbis were making the effort to offer consolations or comforts, nechemptas, to try to just make it easier to deal with this reality of being human. So one of the things that I think is very common about the process of approaching and going through dying is a loss of control. And so I brought this text from Devarim Rabbah. Deuteronomy is Devarim, and the Midrash Rabbah is a whole collection of texts that accompanies it, extra material. So I'm going to read this to you, and this is a story about Moses. All right. So this is near the end of Moses's life, in Deuteronomy here about his death, right? So Moses goes to visit Joshua, who was going to be his successor, one last time. In the meantime, the people looking for Moses approach Joshua's doorstep. The people said to Moses, "Moses, our teacher, teach us Torah." And he replied, "I no longer have the authority." To which they responded, "We will not leave you." And then a bat kol, a divine voice, comes forth from heaven and commanded the people, willing to learn from Joshua. And with that, the people submitted to the command to sit and learn from Joshua's mouth. Joshua sat at the head with Moses at his right and Aaron's sons at his left, while Joshua taught in Moses' presence. So think about this for a moment and what's happening here. Moses, who's been a strong presence, the of leadership in our community, is being replaced. He is fading into sort of insignificance. I mean, it's always going to be the Torah that came from Moses, through Moses, but now it's Joshua who's going to lead. And my guess is you can think of examples where either your children have begun to take over responsibilities that were yours. Sometimes this happens at the Seder table, where grandpa has been leading forever, but grandpa's getting confused now. And so it's time for dad to take over, but doing so can really make grandpa feel upset if he feels like his authority, his value is being usurped. And so I think that as we think about death, especially the last section of life, which is often very is weakened and is in one in which the roles reverse, where the adult children start having to take care of and sometimes making decisions that are very upsetting to the parents, the elderly parents, the sandwich generation phenomenon. This is hard, where we start to feel like, my place is no longer of great import. I didn't bring it, but there's another Mishnah that talks about the different stages of life through each decade. You've seen me show it before, but when it gets to the years of 100 years old, I believe it's something like it's as if he is dead and gone from the earth. And it suggests that, yeah, we stop having the same kind of centrality, and that can be tough for folks. This is a continuation. At that session, the tradition of wisdom was taken away from Moses and given to Joshua. When they went out, Moses walked at Joshua's left, and as they entered the tent of meeting, a pillar of cloud came down and formed a partition between the two. After the cloud departed, Moses went over to Joshua and asked, "What did the word," meaning God, "what did God say to you?" And Joshua replied, "When God used to reveal itself to you, did I know what it said to you?" In that instant, Moses cried out in anguish and said, "Rather 100 deaths than a single pang of envy. Master of universes, until now I sought life. Now my soul is surrendered to you." So picture that. They're walking up, and then all of a sudden that pillar of cloud, which has always separated Moses from all the people, comes down, but it separates him from Joshua, who's now receiving the prophecy. And Moses just doesn't know what to do with this. This is really hard. And so a text like this acknowledges the fear of becoming irrelevant. Thoughts or observations on this? Okay.
Soul surrendered to you.
Mm.
The acceptance of that for the thought.
Yeah. Oh,
Also the fact that knowing that it was done.
Dennis, you haven't seen nothing yet. Dennis just said that this demonstrates for us a little bit of the way that Moses is preparing for death. But wait till I show you the text next. So here's what I would say as far as this this acknowledgement that death is coming for us, like it or not. It made me think about how, and Julie thinks I'm crazy for this, but when I get a new car, I actually look forward to the first scratch. You do too? Do you know this? Or you do. So I know it's coming, and it's going to create great anxiety for me until it happens. Once it happens, the anxiety dissipates. I live at much greater ease. The second ding pisses me off. But knowing that it's coming is in many ways almost comforting. It's not a question of, can my car remain pristine forever? I know the answer to that question. The answer is no. And so when the ding comes, not only is it not upsetting, it's almost comforting and reassuring. And so as we think about our lives, knowing that final ding is coming, it's possible that a person could use that and say, "Oh, yeah, it is. There's nothing I can do to avoid it. It's going to be part of the reality. And so I can just live with that truth." I was thinking about this question as well and wondering which would be preferable in your mind. This is a real question. Would you prefer to get a diagnosis telling you that you have a terminal illness and you have about a year to live? Or would you prefer to get a terminal diagnosis and not know and have no idea how long it might take? It could take a year, it could take a month, it could take 10 years. Which of those realities seems preferable, and maybe why, Leslie?
So you started off initially talking about man's relationship with anxiety. I would suggest that the opposite of that was what you said in terms, you knew the scratch was going to happen. You had control. So that may be the opposite. And here also, with the question of death and knowing you have a year, there would be no anxiety. It's personality driven also, but you have the ability to have control and plan out that last year. On the other hand, somebody might say, no, I don't want to know. And that may give them comfort.
Yeah, so. Right. I might suggest a word other than control, because I don't have control over whether or not the scratch is coming in my car or whether I'm dying. I might propose the word intentionality to go along with it as well, which I think is kind of what you meant. You're saying controlling how you relate to the fact that the scratch is coming, which is what I mean too. But I examine my car looking for that scratch. Once the scratch comes, I relax and I don't really pay much attention to it. And I think that that's what you put your finger on too with regard to a terminal diagnosis. If you know you've got a year to live, I think most people are going to make as much out of that year as they can. They're going to live with great intentionality, versus the rest of us who all have, as I said, that terminal illness. We're all terminally ill in that sense. And so not knowing what that expiration date is means that we live maybe with a great deal less intentionality. Go ahead, Dennis.
I think it's just more, it's, to me anyway, would be much more nerve-wracking if somebody said you have terminal illness, but we don't know when you're going to die. That means every day you could wake up and that's the day you're going to die.
Right.
Kind of makes every day filled with anxiety.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody gives you more of an open time frame, at least you know that there's a period of time when you can live however you want to live. Yeah, there's always the uncertainty. You could always get hit by a bus.
That's fabulous. I didn't bring it tonight, but I was thinking about the text that that talks about how you're supposed to repent one day before your death. And the students asked the rabbi, how can you possibly do that? No man knows when he's going to die. And the rabbi said, exactly. So you should repent every day. But living as if every day might be your last. You want to pass it to Amy?
I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second from the.
Please do.
So there's a book called The Measure by Nikki Ehrlich. And, basically the premise is everyone wakes up to find a box containing a string with a length showing how much they have left to live. And the whole book is about what you do with your string. Do you have a long string? Do you have a short string? Do you open your box? And it's, kind of exactly what you're saying, but this whole book is about that. If you just passed it to Amy, I'm sure she can tell you a little bit more about it than I can, but I did just want to throw that out there with the topic that you're talking about.
That's great. That's great. I love that, Sherry.
It's an excellent book.
Is it a full-size book for adults, or is it more of a...
Yeah, it's an adult.
That's terrific. Thank you for that. The Measure.
I didn't read the book, so I have nothing to say about
it.
My thought was that the question is almost more relevant for the survivors than the person who dies, in the sense that you can prepare for a death when you know it's coming, or if someone's ill, you psychologically get ready, as opposed to someone who, let's say, has an accident and it's a sudden death. So the concept here that we're talking about is not only for the person experiencing death, but for the survivors. And that context changes how you react to death.
It's a really rich observation. And I thought about that a little bit as I put materials together, because I know that the input I received last session was a mixture, although not always explicit, around individuals' thought process around their own death, and also the anxiety or the thought process around the death of a loved one, the either impending or past death of a loved one. And so I think each person here needs to take some of this information and see what works, what fits, what doesn't. We'll get into a few more steps in just a minute. Carol?
I have a couple of thoughts. The first was that when my mother was given a diagnosis of lung cancer, and she was told she could live 6 months to a year, as soon as she got the diagnosis, that was the end for her. She said, why didn't they just tell me I had bronchitis? And that's a generational thing, where the doctor was the know all be all, but just don't tell.
Yeah.
For me, I'd rather know exactly.
Yeah.
However, it was interesting. My 8-year-old grandson talks a lot about death because his grandfather recently passed away. And he said, and my mother's father just died. My father's father is dead, and you're going to die too. And so I said, yeah, that's right. So that was just the children are much more honest and aware.
They are. And it's a really interesting set of choices that every parent makes around how honest and open to be with their kids about death. In many cultures, it's much more front and center, ever present. I was showing a couple of pictures from the trip to Nepal, and after our trek piece, Amitai and I stayed with Friedman for another couple of days and saw a little bit more of Kathmandu, including the central spot along the river, which connects to the Ganges, where almost the entire country cremates its dead. And so we're watching. I mean, there were thousands of people just sitting there watching as, I don't know, 8 or 10 funeral biers were burning. And we watched as one family was burying grandma's body. It's right there. And Amitai was very comfortable with it, because he grew up in a family where it was just a part of our reality. In fact, there was a long period of time where my daughter, and we did get her therapy for this, don't worry, where she was drawing all her pictures of everything, unicorns and rainbows and the family and everything. And every picture had a little dead boy ground. Lying sideways under the ground. There was the family and the little dead boy. And, it was just the weirdest thing, but really interesting. It wasn't her brother. Her brother was happy in the pictures. But then I always have families too that ask me the question, Grandpa just died. We have a funeral coming up. Should we bring the kids? And it depends, of course, how old the kids are and what the family's level of comfort is. Should we bring the kids to the cemetery? Should we let the kids take part in shoveling dirt onto the casket? And, I can't answer questions, but my inclination in most cases is to say, yeah, this is a part of understanding the beauty of life because of its finite nature. All right, one more comment from Barbara. What's that?
It's also today, because when my grandfather died, my brother and I were put in a friend's house and not near any.
Yeah, correct. One more comment from Barbara, and then we're going to go on with more material. Here's the microphone.
Thank you. Well, maybe I'll change my mind, but I think I would rather not have the specific amount of time told me. Sort of for several reasons. One is, for those of us in the last phase of our life, we sort of do have a diagnosis that we will die within so many years. We already have that diagnosis, and we are at this age with our medical conditions more vulnerable for something sudden. So I think this is the time to already start living as if, and not, because the implication is if you have 1 year, then you're going to act differently.
Yeah.
And I'm also think of Nora Ephron's book, where she did not tell anybody because she wanted everybody to treat her the same and not start treating her like she was a dead person.
Yeah.
And so I think I would like to start that process now and just make sure I'm expressing myself to everyone, because I don't know, could have a stroke.
That's marvelous. That's a great answer. And, and your advice or wisdom or approach could be, just as relevant for my 10-year-old daughter as for a 70-year-old man. So here's another element that I think is commonly held in I don't know, the pits of stomachs when it comes to death, and that is being alone. And And there seem to be two groups of folks: those who desperately do not want to be alone, who make it clear at the time. And then you all know these stories, lots of cases. I've seen so many of them where a family member sits vigil with the dying loved one around the clock until, she's got to get up and stretch her legs, or she's got to go to the bathroom or whatnot. And in that 2 minutes that she's out of the room, the loved one dies. And it's such a common trend or pattern that it almost makes one wonder, is there something so private about that moment of letting go? So I'm going to show a few more texts. Back over here. The next one is just that sentence from the 23rd Psalm that we all know. Gam ki elech b'ge'el samavet lo irara. Why? Ki ata imadi. Even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'm not going to fear evil. How can you not be afraid in the valley of the shadow of death? Because you're with me, God. There's something sort of sweet about that. And this is a theology thing. For those who relate to a personal God who's aware of you and who's there with you and for you, this is incredibly comforting. So here's a long text. Settle in, because I'm going to read it all. And this is the piece, Dennis, I was referring to a few moments ago. This is again from Deuteronomy Rabbah about Moses' death. The time of Moses came to an end. A divine voice went forth saying, the end, your death draws near. Moses responded to God, Master of the universe, remember the day when you revealed to me in the bush and you said to me, go, I shall send you to Pharaoh to bring forth my people, the children of Israel, from Egypt. Remember the day when I stood upon Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights? Please don't hand me over into the power of the angel of death. He's saying, my life had powerful big moments that we shared. Don't bring this to an end. We got a good thing going. The divine voice answered, don't be afraid. I myself shall attend to you and to your burial. At that time, Moses stood and purified himself like one of the seraphim, the angels, and the Holy One descended from the highest heavens to fetch the soul of Moses. And 3 ministering angels accompanied him, Michael, Gabriel, and Zagzagel. Michael laid out the bier for Moses. Gabriel spread a linen cloth at its head, and Zagzagel stood at its foot, with Michael on one side and Gabriel on the other. So imagine this. This is like, there's choreography here. They are forming an angelic, I don't even know what the word I'm looking for is here, a team surrounding Moses. God said to Moses, shut your eyes. And he closed his eyes. God said, place your hand upon your chest. And he placed his hand on his chest. God said, put your feet close together. And he put his feet close together. And then God called out to the soul, saying, my daughter, I allocated you 120 years to be in the body of Moses. Now your time for departure has arrived. Come out. Don't delay. The soul responded, Master of the universe, you created me and formed me and placed me in the body of Moses for 120 years. Is there a body in the universe that's purer than the body of Moses? I love him and don't wish to depart from him. God answered, soul, come out without delay, and I will cause you to ascend to the highest heaven, and I will install you under the throne of glory next to the cherubim and the seraphim. So here we've got another element. Now, in our tradition, we tend to separate between the soul and the self. In other words, you could imagine someone saying, of course I have a soul, which is suggesting that there is you and you have a soul, which is not you, it's your soul. mysticism says they're one and the same. And you sort of see that here, where the soul is saying, I've gotten to live in Moses's body. Effectively, I am the self of Moses. The body has been my vehicle for these 120 years. And I think that that's an interesting place for you to explore. Is there something separate from you that is your soul? And when you die, that's what continues on, whereas you come to an end? Or are they one and the same? Art Green says, we don't have a soul, we are a soul. And I think that's an interesting and lovely way to express it. So now we're getting to the next story. At that time, the Holy One, blessed be God, blessed Moses and took his soul while kissing his mouth. And then God wept, saying, there shall never again arise a prophet like Moses in Israel. This is a beautiful and comforting image that, while it's assigned to Moses as the greatest human that's ever lived, and would God do this for everybody? I think that the insinuation is, yeah, that you need not be alone. And did we talk about last time? We will next time talk about Cheva Kadisha and the act of entrusting your body to the care of volunteers who will lovingly prepare it for burial. After you die, the Cheva Kadisha, a group of men for male deceased and women for female, they gather late in the evening after the rest of the funeral home has gone home, and they clean off any any bandages left from the hospital or IVs that are still in the body. They lovingly pour warm water gently over the body. They dress it in shrouds. It's very quiet. There's just whispering, and there's great reverence and honor paid to the body of the individual. I read this and I think, God, that sounds like a Cheva Kadisha. God is the Cheva Kadisha here for Moses. And for those that worry about, God, what is that last moment like? Maybe imagining this would offer you some comfort. I don't know. Yeah, it really is a beautiful, beautiful step. Okay. No, this is in Deuteronomy Rabbah. The Midrash there's a whole bunch of different collections of Midrash. One of them is known as Midrash Rabbah. And so there's Genesis Rabbah and Exodus Rabbah. This is not in Deuteronomy. But what it's doing here is it's playing on, here, let me go back up to, yeah, I thought maybe at the beginning, but certainly here at the end. So Midrash builds itself on something from the text. So this is one of the very last sentences of Deuteronomy. Lo kam b'Yisrael od k'Moshe navi b'Yisrael. And so it takes that sentence and builds the rest of the story out. Yeah, all the Midrash is in Sefaria. So take a look at this next text. Some of you may have heard me use this at funerals because I think it's fabulous. I don't use it often, but every once in a while, the situation is right. It's from Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes and Lamentations, they sort of go together. Two existentially powerful texts. Ecclesiastes is the happy one. Lamentations is the one that struggles. Both supposedly written by Solomon. But here it says, a good name is better than fine oil. Right. And Tov Yom Hamavet Yom Hivaldo. The day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. Yeah, right? Wait a second. Hold on a second. The day of one. So here we go. So Rabbi Levi explained the verse. He said, Imagine two ships, both laden with merchandise. One is coming into port and the other is going out. However, the people standing on the dock cheered only the ship that's headed back into port. Actually, that's interesting. I have a different version of it that I use. I'm going to tell you the one that I use. Well, so in my version, the people are standing on the dock and only cheering the ship that's headed out to sea. Think about like when the Titanic is headed out, right? And there's bands playing and streamers and everyone's cheering and waving and it's headed out to sea. And when a puzzled spectator sees this and says, "A second, what's going on? Why are you cheering the ship that's coming, that's going out to port and not the one coming in?" The reply is that we're cheering the ship that's coming into dock because we know that it went out in peace and it is returning in peace. However, the ship that's now beginning its voyage, who can tell what her fate will be? You know, the Titanic didn't dock. And so, is there another text on this one? So Rabbi Levi goes and says, it's the same with a person. Your day of birth is you leaving the harbor and entering the dangers of the world, right? Who knows what life is going to be like, what kind of shoals you're going to encounter, or storms, or reefs, or untold pirates, God knows. When a person's born and begins her life's journey, we don't know what sort of life she'll live, nor the nature of her deeds. However, when she's finished her life's journey, the ship is returning to port. You die. You go back into the harbor of God's protection. It's apparent to all what her life and her deeds were like. Interesting twist, right? The day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. That's a wild play on normal first, assumptions. Carol, can you pass that back to Carol? Thanks, David.
To me, it seems like a very Christian idea because I still struggle with the afterlife. And I am sort of in awe of some of my Christian friends who, when someone close to them dies, say, well, he or she is in the afterlife.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll remind you that pretty much everything the Christians have, they got from us. And the idea of afterlife is ours. They made much greater use of it than we did. We still remain focused on life before death. Life after death is part of the system of theology that helps explain why bad things happen to good people. Because organized religion was commanding this type of lifestyle, a lifestyle that demanded adherence and limitation of one's urges and inclinations. There had to be some reward for that. If you're living the good life the way that the Bible or its interpreters tell you to live, then you should get something good for it, right? There should be a reward. And yet we know that that's not how it works. And so religion, again, primarily Christianity, said, no, you don't understand. The reward that you're going to get, it doesn't come in this life. And the punishment that bad guy should get, and yet he seems to continue to win, that bad guy is going to get his punishment. Don't worry, in the next life. And it's going to be way more of each. The reward is going to be way better than anything you could enjoy in this world. And the punishments be way worse. And there you see Dante's Inferno, right? Where he just goes to unbelievable lengths to try to create an image of just how bad hell is going to be. But hell is our concept. The maybe now I'll do this next text. Here, first of all, this is just a quick poem. And I could not find attribution. You know that I like to give credit where it's due. And so I wrote this last night, and no, I'm kidding. I didn't write this. Fear, not of death or of dying, but of not having lived. Fear, not of suffering, but of suffering for no cause. Fear, not of extinction of life, but of having left no trace upon the earth. You want me to pause in the middle? Okay. Fear, not of finitude, but of being forgotten. Take heart. Make this a life not lived in vain. Take heart. Make this a life not lived for naught. You know, it's a beautiful articulation, I think, of some of the well, I heard it in Leslie's advice before. You know, let's make the most of what time we've got. Let's make it. We're all going to suffer. That's reality. Life includes suffering. In fact, I think one of my high holiday sermons is going to be looking at the difference between happiness and joy. Happiness being, that momentary situational pleasure, and the pursuit of happiness means trying to push away all the things that are hard and unpleasant. Joy is that deep-seated sense that I'm using my life well, and that what I have, what I am, what I've done is worthy of acknowledgement. And sometimes it hurts, and sometimes it's hard, and sometimes it costs. And yet, that some of the most joyful people that you've encountered are ones that have lived through incredible adversity. Carolyn.
I just have a request to have a copy of that.
Sure. Yep. Oh, that's a very reasonable request. I will make sure that everybody has copies of the materials. So now I'm going to read you a modern midrash. So this is not going to be found on Sefaria. This is a midrash that someone today wrote, in this era. I don't mean today. And I was wrong. The one that I said was long last time, I knew I had one long one. It wasn't that one. It's this one. Picture twins before birth, resting peacefully in the womb of their mother, their mouths closed, fed with no effort on their part, through the tube entering their navels, warmed by the fluids of the amniotic sac. They feel completely at peace and secure. They can't possibly conceive of a more comfortable or different way of life. Allow them now, if you will, the gift of consciousness. Assume that they are aware of their surroundings. And imagine that they begin to consider their future. They recognize change taking place around them. They feel themselves descending and start to debate what's going to happen to them. The brothers each have strongly opposing views. One is by nature an optimist, the other a pessimist. The first is a believer, the second a skeptic. The believer is certain that another life awaits them after they're expelled from their present home. I can't believe, he says with assurance, that God would have put us here for 9 months, cared for us, nurtured us, and allowed us to grow and develop without any purpose. There must be some greater plan, but we still do not know. Our presence here could only have been preparation for a more glorious life to follow. There you go, Carol, a more glorious life than what is here and now. It's impossible to think that all we can look forward to is total oblivion. His brother, however, is much more of a realist. He despises wishful thinking and unsupportable expectations. For him, faith, as Marx would put it, it's no more than an opiate for the masses. There you go, he says disdainfully to his twin, confusing your hope with truth. The obvious fact is that everything that gives us life, the live, the cord from which we're fed, the security of our sack. It's only here. Once we leave this place, we must die. The believing brother again tries to make his case. He suggests that once out of the womb, they'll be able to move even more freely. He talks about the possibility of other ways of getting food. He shares his dream of a kind of independence that goes beyond their present imagination. But unfortunately, he can't put it into words. Lacking any contact as yet with life as it's lived on earth, he is stymied, and his brother puts down his views as impossible and asks him to defend his ideas with concrete examples. So the twins come ever closer to their destined meeting with birth, separated by drastically different opinions about their fate. The believer is confident that he will not only survive, but be even better off than he was before. The skeptic morosely awaits the collapse of his world in the coming down of the final curtain. Suddenly, the water inside the womb bursts. There's a pushing and pounding. The twins realize that they're being forced from their home. The traumatic moment is here. The believer is the first one to exit the wall. His twin brother, still inside, listens attentively for any clue from the other side. With grieving heart, he takes note of a piercing cry coming from his brother. Oops, that's not what I wanted. I thought I had a little bit to that. Yeah, I missed the slide. It goes on and says this. So I was right after all, he tells himself. I just heard my poor brother scream of death. At that very moment, a joyous mother and father are congratulating each other on the birth of their first child, who has just made his presence known by his cries of life. What appears like death, when viewed from one perspective, is in reality a higher form of life. Death and rebirth are synonymous. One leads to the other. Now, I don't like this midrash, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but I wonder if anyone has any thoughts about how this struck you. Oh, Leslie hears the potential conversation between Adam and Eve, uncertain about what's coming, or with Adam and Eve, that the end of the first day as the sun is setting on the sixth day, they don't know what's happening. They've never seen a sunset before. And the Midrash tells us they're terrified and they think this is it. It's all over. And they huddle together in the cold darkness of night, just waiting for it all to end until the sun comes up and they realize, okay, there's more to this story. That's great. Thank you. David?
It assumes there's an afterlife.
This assumes an afterlife. Exactly right. Yes.
So you have to be a believer in that or not.
There's a place in this story for the non-believer. Here's what I don't like about it. Well, I mean, the non-believer is going to be proved wrong, right? He is soon to realize, I was wrong. Is it going to change his perspective on things? Of course not. He's going to enter the world and he's going to be one of those people you don't like to spend much time with. Here's what I don't like about it. I don't like the suggestion that the time in the womb for the pessimist is all there is, coming across as a negative. Carol, I got the impression from you before that there was a sense that you don't buy into the idea of an afterlife. I don't either. That doesn't mean that we live a bleak, meaningless existence. They're saying here, the optimist says, this must all be preparation for something better. You and I are leading pretty good lives now. I don't need something better after I die. But for those who are looking to the next chapter, and I might be wrong, The fact that I don't have that confidence leaves me wondering, will I find myself on the other side of the wall, realizing, oh boy, was I excited back there in that world. You and I will laugh about that someday. Maybe when, in the next world, we'll have a drink and we'll laugh. But I don't like the suggestion or the insinuation that the optimist who believes in the next world is the one who gets to live fully, whereas the one who doesn't believe in the next world is a pessimist and negatively portrayed here. That's the only thing I don't like about this. For those who take great excitement and enthusiasm about what's next after death, this is a beautiful story. One of the books that we read to kids, anyone remember The Fall of Freddie the Leaf? Is that a book you know? It's a book about Freddie. He's hanging onto the tree with all his leaf friends, and he's hanging on for dear life, terrified of the fact that fall has arrived, and leaves all around him are dropping off and falling away, and he's terrified. And when he ultimately can hang on no longer and is blown off by a breeze, he realizes, oh God, this journey down to the ground is marvelous. He loves every minute of it. There's another version of a snail or something in a riverbed hanging on to the moss and terrified of being washed away. But as soon as he is washed off the seaweed or whatever, he goes on this marvelous journey and he loves it. So there's all kinds of ways that we try to take the fear and anxiety and transform it into another possibility. Maybe dying doesn't have to be so scary. Yeah, Diane.
Talking about the afterlife and that some people believe and some people don't, and that's fine. But I just wonder where this fits in. We're talking about Moses and his soul is taken by God. It goes back. If we believe something like that in Judaism, then why isn't soul going back and all of our souls going back, meaning that there is at least the existence of the soul somewhere with God? Because, personally, my dad died when I was very young. And to me, I always said, well, wherever he's going, I'm going. So, and when I hear, okay, the soul is being taken by God, then mine will too. So who's to say that we don't all convene? Just our souls.
Nobody is to say that.
I'm not sure if what.
So here's where I think you're getting stuck. I think you're looking for what Judaism says about afterlife. Yeah, and you're going to be disappointed because Judaism says that the souls are reconvened and join God. And lots of Jews say, no, they don't. And neither group can prove to the other. And we saw that in this narrative with the twins, that the one who believes in the next life is trying to help his pessimistic brother see this, and no amount of argument can convince him of that. Neither can the pessimistic twin convince the optimist that just being silly. Your desire is overpowering fact. And so I think what you have understood to be the case is absolutely right. That, and I'm not being hypocritical here when I say this. It's absolutely right that Judaism's message is consistently that when we die, that's not the end. And that we talked about it last session. We don't know whether we maintain a consciousness, whether we see our dad the moment we die and we run across a field and we embrace and we're so happy to be reunited, or if it's something else. Is it just the energy that is combined together in the universe? This I'm very comfortable with. And so what you have pictured all along is correct.
Quick question.
Yeah.
From the Devarim about Moses.
Yes.
when God said, I put my daughter into your body, can you talk about that a second? What is the female thing coming in?
Yeah, he didn't say my daughter. And I only want to clarify that because it sounds a little too close to the notion of God sending a child into the world, which is not a Jewish teaching.
Right.
He addresses the soul as daughter. And my guess is that comes the fact that the word for soul, or neshama, is a feminine word. We have lots of different euphemisms for God. Almost all of them are masculine, but not all of them. And there's lots of example where our tradition has wished to emphasize the feminine energies. Not that God is male or female, but that there are elements that we ascribe to male, which God sometimes expresses. And there are the same elements to female that God sometimes expresses. So we have this very intimate space where there's almost this marriage between the soul and Moses, and she loves him. And it helps that Moses is male and she is female, and that she doesn't want to leave. She loves it there. So I think that's why the Midrash chose the female pronoun. Maybe grammatically, but more than that, I think just emotionally it works better. Barbara.
Well, I've come to the place, something you just mentioned, that we have energy inside us, and that energy is released. I believe the laws of physics prove that. And that is what our soul is. And in fact, God is energy, and we're made in God's image. I think where things get complicated for us is all the paintings we've seen of hell, heaven and hell. And it's just like trying to get out of the picture of God as a man above. We have this, and then when people say there's nothing, there is no heaven and hell, they picture blackness. So we're stuck with these visions we're trying to work against, when actually just the release of our energy, that's something which I find very comforting without having to picture what happens.
Yeah, two quick thoughts in response. One is that it's incredibly prescient or aware that our earliest texts say, do not create images of heavenly important things. Somehow they knew that boxing us in with an image is going to do far more damage for our flexibility of theology and belief. And so all those paintings you're describing, they're probably all Christian paintings. We don't do that, and for good reason. The second thought I was going to offer is that when I was hearing you talk about the blackness and the nothingness, I think that was really smart. And it made me think about how we stretch our brains to understand the notion of infinity when we think about the vastness of the universe. And I was just watching I don't know, something from probably Neil deGrasse Tyson or something about, well, what's on the outside of the universe? If you went right up to the edge of the universe and you reached out to the other side, what would be there? And the inability of our brains to comprehend notions of infinity like this, I think, apply similarly to notions of death. And then kind of getting back to Diane's thought process, one must wonder, after the light switch is flipped off for the body, and this is no longer a functioning machine, are we conscious enough to say, wow, it's really dark here? Or have we transformed into something else? And, I keep waiting for a sign, and I haven't gotten it yet. Ellen, you want to?
I had two comments, just one to kind of go back a little bit about God addresses as the soul as my daughter. I interpreted it slightly different. I thought it was kind of to make a point that maybe the soul was neither male or female, and that Moses was just like this physical body that presented as male. And then the second thought I had was just about, so much we're talking about, like, what is it in that moment of death and right after death? And I wonder if there's a way to just find comfort in not knowing.
Well, let me take a slightly different angle and ask a question. And you know what? I'll leave you the microphone because you might be the first one to answer. This is a question meant to get you thinking, and maybe a few of you will reflect out loud, but please not everybody because we don't have time. But when you think about the ideal death for yourself, what's it look like? You know, and the factors to speak to include: where are you? Who's with you? What are you wearing? How alert are you? I mean, what would be the ideal death? Because while we can't control very much, sometimes we have the ability to manipulate conditions. I know some people lots of people actually, who say, I do not want to die in a hospital. I want to die in my own home. And it's really odd, but that is exactly the opposite of how I feel. I can't imagine dying in my house. You agree? So I feel like it does. I've never said it out loud. I've never, taught this section of a class like this. So this is the first time I've ever said that out loud to anybody. So getting validation from a couple of you saying, no, I get that. I really appreciate that because I thought I was the weird one.
I found that surprising.
Right. I think far more people have told me, oh no, anything but the hospital. So, that's my stuff. Does anyone have thoughts on what the best circumstances? You're going to die. So, the best circumstances. Hospice. Yep. Carol says in her sleep. Right. Art?
Died without pain. And when I've always been happy knowing that they didn't suffer at the end of their life.
Yeah.
I think that would be an ideal thing for me, not to suffer. Just to go.
Art says a death without suffering. Yeah, go ahead. Thanks, Jane.
We had our housekeeper have hospice at home. That was her choice. And she was surrounded by us as her family and our dogs. And to me, that was the best way to go. Hospice was there to help, but being at home surrounded by everybody with the dogs there, and you know me as a dog lover, that to me is the perfect way to go.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that, Jane. Stu, you want
to? My thinking is, it's just over. It's the machine. It wore out. It's over. And so I don't worry much about death, because it just ended. It's more of a scientific view, I think.
So when I hear you describe that, it's a great response to the moment after death. But what about those moments leading up to death? That's sort of where I've taken us back in this part of the conversation. Where do you want to be? Do you care? Who do you want to be with? Do you care? Does it matter? Or, you happy just being left by the side of the road? And
like what Art was saying, okay, as long as there's no pain, and it doesn't really matter.
Is there a difference? and I'm not putting you on the spot, but is there a difference? Art kept saying suffering, and I'm wondering if there's a difference between pain and suffering. Does pain, Barbara is shaking her head, which means pain is equal to suffering.
I would think so.
You think so? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
David?
Suffering includes pain, but suffering doesn't necessarily have to be with pain. My grandmother was in a very poor state for almost 3 years, and she was suffering, and all the people around her were suffering. And that is not a nice or good or meaningful way to end your life.
I tell this story often. Carolyn, sorry, did you want to weigh in? Your hand was up before too, and then we'll move over to Carol and Ellen.
I think I was just thinking about this as a sharing, and I don't imagine it will be easy to without pain. It can be managed in hospice, and I know that there is a practice because I have heard people whose relatives died and they were there at the end, and it's in hospice they increase the morphine.
Yeah.
And they say now if you release this much morphine, it will take the person out. The person will die. And so there was this time when the grandchildren could come, the relatives could come, the children came, and chatting and candy and ice cream and all kinds of things were discussed and shared, and then goodbyes were said. And when he went to sleep that night, he didn't wake up.
Wow.
And his daughter, his oldest daughter, wanted to be with him through the night. So
that's really a beautiful scene.
Yeah.
She said that using the pain management of hospice meant that there was some control brought back into the situation, and he was able to be with the family and laugh and have ice cream, and then that night to go to sleep and not wake up. And that is one of the, we'll talk about hospice next week, but that is one of the great benefits of hospice, and maybe not even the most important benefit of hospice. Thank you for that. What a beautiful image. Yeah. Wind?
I see suffering psychologically. When my partner passed, when it became obvious that she was not going to survive for much longer, our son was away. And in order to ease her suffering, we made every effort to bring Brent into the room to relieve that psychological distance that she was feeling. And so to me, suffering can be psychological. It can also have a component of pain to it. But I thought I should bring that up.
Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to say, and this might be a good moment to do so, that one of the many elements of death and dying is to think about this as another parenting moment, that our kids are watching us no matter how old we are or they are, and they're always learning from us. And not to put undue pressure on a person who's going through potentially a really harrowing experience, but I really resonate with what I heard Wind say, that there can actually be great joy and meaning that is a part of the pain that might be present. I appreciate too that suffering is psychological, pain is physical, and they are usually connected. I don't think they always have to be connected, but I also don't want you to feel like a failure if you're in pain and suffering. I know one individual who underwent an organ transplant, and she was an accomplished practitioner of martial arts for 20 years. And her teacher said to her before the surgery, We have worked on mindfulness for decades together now. You know how to do this. You don't need the pain medication. And she came out of the surgery and declined all pain medication through the recovery in the hospital. I don't know. I don't take Novocaine because I don't like the numbness. I can handle the pain for a while. I'd rather the pain for a while than the numbness for hours. But I'm no stoic who could imagine a surgery without pain meds. I guess my point is, I don't think she suffered through the pain of that recovery. But I think it's an unusual case. Thank you, Wind. I appreciate that. Who has the mic? Carol, go ahead.
I have a couple of quick stories. Number one, when my cousin was going through serious surgery, she told us that she saw her grandmother and said, I mean, you've probably heard this. She said, go back. And she knew that she was going to survive. Ultimately, when she was passing away, I never had the guts to say, did you see grandma? But yeah. On the other side, my uncle was being removed from life support system. And I was the one who was chosen to be there because his wife and his son couldn't be there in the room. And that was the one time I became not afraid of death because I went through the gasping and everything else, and it was very peaceful.
Wow. Oh, that's beautiful.
It's the dying, not the death.
You're right. I never get the punchline quite right, but someone said was it you that said in your sleep? Of course, in your sleep, right? And there's the one liner that says, yeah, I want to die peacefully in my sleep, just like my grandfather did. Not like all those people who were screaming on the bus he was driving.
I've had the experience to be with some people close to me as they were starting that transition to pass over. And I do energy work and work with people. I've found it to be a very intimate and very special time when they actually are in both worlds. Things that we are not able to see and starting that connection. I don't know where it is to or really how to describe it, but the things that we have heard, seeing other people in the room. And I do feel cases that having morphine after that starts, that's without any medications, but having morphine can inhibit that transition and the experience that we have with that loved one passing over.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've seen a couple of those moments as well, but I don't have enough experience to have seen that the morphine will bring it to a close. That's really interesting. Thank you.
I think I was just going to kind of echo on what was said here about the pain and suffering. And when I think about death, I also think about birth. And also I liked what was said, just that being a different experience for each person. I think about my own. I had my first daughter was born at home, a beautiful, unmedicated, painful, yet euphoric, empowering, a wonderful experience. And that's very much how I envision my death. I was surrounded by the people I wanted there with me.
That's cool. So would you say that you suffered during that birth?
It did not at all. Not at all.
The right word.
Mm-mm.
I actually
chance.
Sorry, go right ahead, Bud.
Yeah, it's Bud. I've been listening to this, and I was interested in someone that talked about the energy, because I've always felt, why are we distinguishing death from a human perspective than any other entity that dies? And every entity does die in some way. But the whole universe is made up of matter. You think of a star, you think of every plant, you think of every animal. And when a star dies, the matter that makes up the star doesn't go away. It just gets dispersed throughout the energy, throughout the universe. And I think everything that lives, when it dies, its energy doesn't go away. Its matter still gets dispersed through the universe. I don't think that suffering and pain have anything to do with death. It may be coincidental that somebody dying has suffering and pain, but somebody that lives also can go through suffering and pain. Nobody wants to go through suffering and pain at any point during their life. So I don't think those two are definitely connected. But I do think nobody wants to suffer. Nobody wants to have to go through pain at any point in their life. And I don't think suffering and pain are the same thing. You may have pain while you're suffering, but suffering is a different thing. But I've always felt that when a person dies, it's like any other entity that dies. The matter doesn't go away. The matter just gets dispersed. So you've got the matter while this entity is alive. We keep that matter, and at some point that burns out and the matter goes away. Every star has that same issue. Every plant has that same issue. Every other living creature has that same issue. And I don't believe that the matter ever dies. The matter just goes away and our entity dies, and that's the end of it.
Even a little bit more beautiful than that, Bud, because the plant that dies or the star that explodes, that energy doesn't just dissipate in entropy, it is recycled into something else.
That's my point. Matter stays forever. That's what the universe is left in. And that's my whole point. And I think that happens to us like it happens to everything else.
Thank you. Tamara, I saw you turn your camera on. You want to join?
Yeah, I think to follow up on what Bud just said, I know after my mother passed away, as I was going through her writings, I found a piece she had written where she was talking about how what she really takes comfort in thinking about death is how her body would then go on to kind of feed the soil and all the creatures in the soil, you know, so again, kind of to go on living in a sense through them. And I've always been struck when someone dies, I don't know if this is a specific saying in Judaism, but it seems like the thing everyone says is, you know, may their memories be a blessing. And I think that the way that the memories are thought of by family, by friends, etc., that the person, whether you believe in an afterlife or not, that is the afterlife of that person, that they are living on through, you know, both their DNA if they had children, but also through the memories of what they did in their life and how they touched people and the memories that they created around them. And the last thing I would say is for my friends that lost parents before I lost my mother, what they really expressed usually was that the hardest thing was feeling that you had left something unsaid, you know, usually a kindness or a gesture. And so that really resonated with me to make sure that, you know, you don't leave things unsaid, unresolved, whether they're kind or not, but that someone doesn't die and you feel like, oh, I should have X, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. I have a couple more things I want to share with the group, and I want to try to wrap us up in 10 minutes. Be respectful of your time. So I'm going to take what Tamara just said and use it a bit further, because I actually forgot to finish my thought before when we were talking about when I was saying that parenting is continuing through our final breath. And I heard that in what Tamara was describing with her mother's death and the communication that she offered. And so I want to try to show you another way of again, contextualizing, I guess. So this is this and the next piece are first one by Shai Held. He's a rabbi in New York. He's marvelous. I have a rabbi crush on him, and you know, it annoys me that one rabbi can be so good at being a rabbi. But enough said. He's interested in the word awe and fear, because there are multiple words like in any language, but the word yirah is translated equally as fear and as awe. So he says, if fear and awe are so different, why does the same Hebrew word convey both? And he says, my teacher, Bernard Steinberg, once offered a powerful answer. I'm going to read it twice. Awe is what happens to fear when it stops being about me. This is what I heard in Tamara's reflection of her mother. Awe is what happens to fear when it stops being about me. I hear this in Bud's answer as well. You know, there's no fear in what's next, because I feel too much awe when I look at it all. So here's like Toba Spitzer is also a modern active voice in the rabbinic world, and she's fabulous. She says, fear arises when I feel out of control, when things do not go the way I anticipated. When I'm fearful, the word I is always at the center. I can't do this. I'm worried about that. I can't bear it. What will I do? But if I can simply stand in the presence of what is, if I allow myself to be overtaken by the sense of wonder that Heschel describes, that radical amazement, then fear becomes awe. My terror at losing something precious to me melts in the awareness of all that is beyond me, all that is greater than me, all of which I'm a part. And in that moment, my heart opens, because it's not really about me at all. None of this. I'm broken open and can experience a profound sense of connection, an overwhelming compassion and love, which binds me to everything and everyone. I don't know whether this will speak to anyone else. Again, I don't think I spoke this one aloud either. But I have always taken great comfort in the fact that every single human being that has ever lived, except the ones who are still alive, every single one of them successfully died. And if they could do it, it must not be that hard. For me, that's a comforting thought. That allows me to settle in and say, okay, it's not all about me. I feel a profound connection to all the other human beings who released their grip on life when it was no longer available to them. That's one way that I work through this. And so I don't feel a lot of fear either, but I'm young. We'll see what I feel in another 40 years. Who knows? I'm continuing to grow. Correct. Dennis says it's no unique set of skills to die. Yeah, Barbara wonders if there's maybe curiosity that could be a part of the experience. Not that I'm going to rush out to go, give it a taste, death and all, but what she said was exactly right. That if you approach it as an intentional experience in which you're present, then awe could accompany you. There are lots of definitions of what a good death looks like. Dying peacefully in your sleep, dying surrounded by loved ones, dying while jumping out of an airplane because you love skydiving and you knew the risks. People often say dying while doing what you love, that's a good death. There are all kinds of ways to contemplate what it could look like. Dying well
doesn't tell a skill, which is a frame of mind and perspective and almost preparation.
Yes, I like that a lot. And maybe by way of my closing comment, I'll say that, like the story of the twins, I think there's a potentially unintended consequence in thinking that way, because I think that way too. Here's the consequence. If I get to a point where I find myself in unbearable pain, or I have become miserable in my existence, and I cannot summon the presence to find awe and to live in the curiosity, and my kids are watching and I am miserable and I can't demonstrate a good, graceful death to them, then there could be a lot of psychological pain created by feeling like a failure if I failed to construct for myself a good death. So that's my goal. What David said, that's what I'm shooting for. And if I fall short, I'm just gonna have to forgive myself. So here's my final comment, and that is that I I don't know whether what I brought tonight was what you were hoping for. I don't know if it did anything constructive or just left you feeling more frustrated and isolated and unsure. I don't know whether there was ever going to be a group conversation that answered your need. You came to this session, these 3 sessions, but I told you tonight was going to be about your interests. You came looking for something, and I can't possibly know whether I met that seeking need or created a greater chasm of frustration. So here's what I want to say. Each of you as individuals experienced this conversation, the last conversation, and the next conversation as individuals. And in many ways, this kind of process can only be done as individuals. And so I just want to iterate as often as I need to the invitation to have the conversation with me as an individual, so that you and I can sit across from each other and I can listen deeply to what it was that's been on your mind, that might still be stuck there for you, or some of the changes that you've experienced in the way you think about things, or whatever else you want to bring up. So there it is. I'm just inviting you to call me for a cup of coffee or tea, or if we're at your house, snacks. And let's see what we can do together. Because again, this kind of material it can only take us so far in a group. So our next and final session in this 3-part series is next Thursday, and it's going to be more tachlis, more tactical detail stuff. We're going to talk about things like hospice and rituals that accompany those final hours or weeks and months in certain cases. We're going to talk about the things that happen after death. Some of you are way more familiar just through practice than I am with some of these traditions. And so you go ahead and speak up and teach that part of the class. I'll sit down and happily give you the microphone. And we'll just kind of review in rapid form a lot of the big picture pieces that go along with the Jewish mechanics of death and dying. So first session was about the ideas of afterlife and sanctity of life in general. Second session has been about emotional relationships to the idea of death. And the third session is about the mechanics and tools. Sound good? All right. Folks at home, thank you for joining us. Hope everybody gets home safe. And we'll see you soon. You're welcome, Andrea.
Thank you.
Thanks, Connie.